Let's go!
Video interview with Hamaguchi. Give it to me. Kitase did an interview with Edge Magazine, and there was an interview with Hamaguchi. Bro, hit my ass up. What is happening? Show me. The big Naoki Hamaguchi interview. Leadership, FF7 narrative changes, the future of... Whoa, goddamn. This is getting heavy. This is getting very heavy.
It's always a thrill whenever you get the chance to speak to one of the brilliant minds behind the fabled Final Fantasy franchise. There are just always so many stories to tell. It's why we felt privileged to recently be given the chance to speak with Naoki Hamaguchi, the director of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth.
My man.
So, without further ado, let's dive straight into the interview. Did you always envision having so many minigames, or did the volume steadily increase over time due to how much fun the designers were having?
Good question.
Yeah, so when we first started work on Rebirth, we actually spent the first year of development working out the scale of the world map and the volume of content to fit into the game. The way we developed the mini-games was actually, it wasn't really making more and more as we went along, because in that first year, after we decided how big the world was going to be and the rough volume of content to go into each area, we actually marked out where we wanted the mini-games to be. So we put a mark on the map and say, okay, this is where we're going to have a new mini-game that you meet for the first time in this area, or this is going to be a mini-game that recurs. You're going to play it across several areas as you travel.
I love the bike game. I wish it was harder.
And then we hadn't decided on what types of games it'd be or the specifics of them at that point. But when we then went back and filled out the content for each
G-Bike is one of my favorites.
Area of the game, that's when we dug into it and decided what we would have put there. So it wasn't really a case of making more and more as we went along. We kind of stuck to the original plan we had in terms of the distribution and the volume of the games.
As a follow-up, were there any mini-games you thought would work really well that ended up being cut?
Yeah, so there weren't actually any games that we made or partly made and then had to give up on partway through. I think we don't really have the bandwidth, the resources to just make
everything
them
made it in
and stick them in. And anyway, a lot of the mini games were designed based on the story and how they'd fit into that particular part of the game. Okay, this is what the story is doing in this area, so this is the kind of mini game we want along that kind of logic. So I'd say, yeah, and again, we had a large number to make anyway. There's about 30 different mini games.
The fighting game was terrible, dude.
So we kind of mapped out what they were going to be. It wasn't really a case of just making some and then...
The boxing game should have just been Punch-Out, but it wasn't.
This isn't really a game that was changed completely or cut out because it wouldn't fit in the number or anything like that. But in the mini games under Junon, when you got to get up from under Junon to the top level of Junon, and you get help from the dolphin. And I think in the original Final Fantasy VII, it was a very simple mini game where you just jump on the dolphin's nose and use the extra boost to jump up and grab onto a steel pipe and then climb up from there. And when we started work on the same section in Rebirth, we actually made it pretty much a reproduction of that game as is. And we found out quite quickly that it didn't work. Obviously, the original game, you had a fixed camera, which is looking down on the player, and it was very easy to work out where the dolphin was, jump on the nose and get catapulted up. With a free camera, first of all, you can't tell where the dolphin is at all, and it just really didn't work as a game. So that's why we re-examined that, and we decided instead to make it something.
They turned it into some Sega shit, and I appreciate that.
With the help of the dolphin, and then finally get knocked up. So we had to change the direction of that one.
Or Wave Race.
Card games are a much beloved tradition in the Final Fantasy franchise. How does it feel to have Queen's Blood join the ranks as one of the franchise's great card minigames?
I really am happy with the results of Queen's Blood. Certainly, when we were first deciding about what we were going to do for the mini games, we wanted a mini game that could be played throughout the game in different locations. Obviously, historically, Final Fantasy has had a lot of card games like that, and we felt it was a really good fit to have a card game you could just play with people around the world. So we started fairly early on. I think the first year or so of development on Queen's Blood, we actually sat there with some physical mock-ups of cards and played around with that, or created a prototype Windows application to just test out the game.
The thing about Queen's Blood, which is awesome, is that this shit wasn't in the original game at all. Most of the mini games that you're experiencing, or a lot of them in FF7 Rebirth, are recreations of existing mini games in some way. This one was like truly original. There was no card playing in FF7 in any way. So for them to effectively create a story around Queen's Blood that is also directly tied to like Genova and the story that's happening in FF7 Rebirth Remake as a whole is so sick. Like, they eventually just are like, oh, well, the cuffs are off. They just go straight down the Yu-Gi-Oh rabbit hole.
And from those very early prototype phases, we felt, yeah, this game really has legs. It's something that really has an impact on the players, and everyone seemed to like it. So
although I will say, like most TCGs, or I think the only TCG I've played, and I haven't played a ton of them, that immediately was like, oh, I get it, was like Marvel Snap. Immediately, I just get it. Some TCGs, you get into it, and you're like, I kind of understand what I need to do, but I'm not there yet. I need to play it a bit to really get into it. So it's like in the first few turns, you're not entirely there. It's going to take you a few matches to really even get into some kind of a groove.
Fairly confident with it as we've worked it up and polished it to the final level. But yeah, it's just really great to see that people have reacted so well to that. I'm very happy with the result.
You've mentioned before that it's still undecided whether things like Rocket Town will appear in Part 3.
Okay.
Can you walk us through the creative process you go through when making tough decisions like this about what should or shouldn't be included?
Okay, so first of all, I personally believe that the main storyline, the core of the narrative, is not something we should have multiple people playing with and changing.
Smart.
So in that sense, very much decided to trust and leave it down to our main story writer, scenario writer, Mr. Nojima Kazushige, and it's up to him to write that, really. However, having said that, the initial script that our story writer comes up with is a written story. It's not really written from the perspective of making it presented as a gameplay experience. So certainly that's when myself and the development team step in, and then the changes and adjustments we make are very much in terms of how that's presented through the game structure, the gameplay itself, and what kind of expressions are used to actually show and communicate that story as a game. So that's where we come in terms of our creative input. So one great example of that is the Queen's Blood tournament on the Shinramaru ferry when you're traveling from Junon over to Costa del Sol. And in the original story script that we got, that tournament wasn't part of it at all. It was very much in line with what was in the original game. You'd get on the ferry, there'd be a little travel, and then you'd basically be attacked and go straight into the fight against Genova. But we really felt that as a gameplay experience, that was lacking something. The idea that in real life, if you get one of these big cruise ships, you're excited, you want to have fun, and you want to really recreate that idea of a fun and exciting experience, and like a leisure experience. So that's why we decided to put the Queen's Blood tournament there. And again, it really helps pace it as well, because then to the next really serious story beat, which is the Genova fight, that really makes it much more. The feeling of anticipation and fear, it really ramps it up because you've had that more light-hearted, more fun experience before it. And I think in terms of the Queen's Blood tournament and why we chose that, personally, both myself and our co-director, Mr. Toriyama Motomu, we both watched The Queen's Gambit on Netflix, and I think that must have inspired us somehow to put that tournament in there.
That's a fascinating insight, thank you. Can I also just say that it felt like the sense of humor in Rebirth was completely on point? Yeah,
he didn't mention anything about omissions because he addressed it first and foremost. He's like, if anything is directly tied to the main story of FF7, it ain't leaving. You're not touching it, it's not leaving. And yes, things got mixed around quite a bit. Obviously, things aren't in the same location. I think the Bone Village is still going to be in the game in some way. It's not going to be in the exact same spots. They also changed like the structure of the world, like where things are in the world, just to accompany a modern experience a bit more. That's fine, dude. Again, Bone Village, like Rocket Town, that's all coming back, right? They're saving that stuff effectively for later.
Yeah, I think in terms of the humor, that comes about quite organically in the development, really. It's not really something that I give orders to people to put these in as a director. A lot of this comes from the development floor level and suggestions from the different team members. I think a lot of the team members who work under me on it are people who played the game when they were children or very young, and they were obviously inspired by it. And they've got this feeling of what they remember from the game, and that humor is definitely a part of that. So it's definitely suggestions from them that are, well, could we do this? I'd love to see this. Would it be cool if so-and-so did that? And I think certainly examples of that are something that was talked about a lot was how Red 13 rides on a chocobo.
Bro, this HDR footage.
For riding. Or another one is the synergy ability where Barrett and Aerith team up and Aerith puts on a pair of sunglasses. It really was a case of someone on the team thought, oh, wouldn't it be cool if we did that? And they suggested it and actually got into the final game.
How attuned are you to fan feedback throughout the development process, or do you try to avoid it as much as possible to ensure your creative vision isn't influenced by outside sources?
See, why is it this question
So in terms
is
of
relevant?
listening to fan feedback, user
Because so much of FF7 Remake was left in the air as far as what happens, where it was really hard to initially discern, okay, so where's this story going? Why is this stuff different? What's happening? That wasn't an immediate like appeal at the end of the game. It was something that fans like myself and many others had to sort of dig in and be like, no, dude, there's something going on here that is way beyond the surface level of what this playthrough is. To me, that's a good question because they put that there for that reason. Like, this was some wild ass, like, Back to the Future 2, Sephiroth is Biff Tannen coming back to change shit. And it was like, whoa, holy hell, like, what the hell is going on with this story here? The fact that they wanted to put that there meant that they were giving fans something to chew on. That they knew, A, this shit is going to take years in between games. So we're effectively going to give you some meat to chew on until the next game where you're either going to get confirmation or deconfirmation of said events, and that's happening all over again with Rebirth. They almost knew it even more with Rebirth and left shit even more open-ended, you know?
The feedback, I think it's not that it's a bad thing at all. We do listen to it, certainly. I think it's very important in checking if what we were trying to achieve with the game was actually successful, whether it reached the audience and had the effect we wanted to see or not. So it is.
Yeah, and there you go. For the psychopath FF7 fans that are going to like pinch and chew at everything, yes, that was their goal. Their goal was that for you guys that are really into this FF7 shit, you're going to find some stuff that'll leave you kind of excited and wondering where this is going. But for everybody else, it's just normal. For everybody else, it's just like, oh yeah, the game just plays out. We're going after Sephiroth. Let's go. Like, and even at the end of FF7 Rebirth, a lot of the audience is that way too. Like the majority of the audience is just like, all right, we're going after Sephiroth. Let's go. She's either alive or something not, but clearly something's not normal, but let's just go. People are just willing to accept that situation. Well, anybody that has like perspective and has been paying attention to FF7, you know, shit for a while is like, bro, what the hell is happening? Like, this is really, really not normal. This is definitely deviating from what the original is by a lot.
It's very useful in doing that, and we definitely welcome it. I welcome it for that purpose. But as you say, there is definitely a danger of, in development, if you're just listening to fans the whole time and trying to take on board absolutely everything they say, then it really can blur your vision and kind of move the game in a lot of different directions. And certainly from a director's perspective, if different team members are listening to feedback and always trying to work towards that and following different pieces of feedback, it makes the team almost uncontrollable. So I think there is a time and a place for it. And generally, the way we approach it is, until we've solidified the core concepts we want to work to, we will very much listen to fan feedback, see how that resonates with what we're thinking of, and basically refine our ideas. But then after that, we kind of, okay, we have the idea now, we've got our direction, we have to work towards that. And then that's when we kind of stop looking at feedback so much. I'd say definitely from my own perspective, I think when you're making anything, if you've got that vision.
Don't listen to fans until the game is done. No, it's not entirely that, because a lot of shit in Rebirth is so fan pandering, it's crazy. I don't mind a lot of the insane pandering in Part 2 in Rebirth, because FF7 fans effectively haven't really gotten that, you know? FF7 fans have not entirely gotten the ability to be pandered to outside of clearly the Remake trilogy in itself. So to get those comeuppance in the ways that they are presented and to be executed in the ways that they were is like, fuck, dude, they knew what people were like wanting and shit. And it's a big spoiler, but like who joins you in the final battle and shit is clearly like, whoa, you're already doing this? We're already going here? Like, what is happening? That's clearly the cream of the crop in terms of like, okay, this is some ultra fan pandering shit. This is like 25 years of fan pandering going on here.
And a clear idea of what you want to make, then that's, if you follow that.
Putting up with the compilation for all those years was worth it. Just, you know, being shoveled this slop most of the time, and some of it's pretty good, but just being shoveled this shit. You eat this shit. You're like, you're fucking FF7 fans. Oh, god damn. Yeah, it was worth it. We went through that shit, man. Okay? We went through it.
Like, faithfully,
it all paid out
to the end, then I think you'll always get something out of it, and there'll be
nothing shall forestall my return.
So in some ways, once you've got your idea, you just have to stick with it. You have to follow your vision to the end rather than trying to correct course all along the way. I think that's the right way of doing anything. If you've got an idea, don't think about how it'll be received. You just got to go for it and make it and see where it goes. So there's one kind of funny story about that and about my personal way I interact with fan feedback is that I really, on my personal X account, I very much try and read everything that people say and all the comments. And I think for me, it's very important as a creator to always be listening and aware to what people are saying about your games and about other things as well. So I very much focus on that. But I always try put as much effort in as possible if when someone's made a comment to like it, just to react to what they've said. And it's kind of got a rumor going now that because I do seem to react to pretty much everything anyone posts on my channels, it's like, oh, well,
he does talk a lot on his Twitter, yeah.
To just press like every time he gets a comment, or he's got someone in the team just to do it. Okay, if it comes in, just press that, and he's given them that job. I can tell you now, I do actually read them all. It is actually me doing all of those likes. So, you know, it's not automated at all.
You've talked a lot about how much the Final Fantasy franchise means to you personally, with Final Fantasy IV, VI, and VII having a huge impact on your life and career. Given you're such a big fan, what's it been like to travel around the world to meet with like-minded fans whose lives have also been massively impacted by the franchise?
Yes, I mean, there's a whole gamut of really confusing emotions there, really. Certainly, the fact that, like you say, I was inspired by Final Fantasy originally to take this job, move into this industry and make games, and now it's kind of I'm working with that responsibility for the future of Final Fantasy. So yeah, I'm really happy and glad to be able to do it. But yeah, it is a wild ride, and there's a lot of weird feelings about that.
Do you sometimes find it hard to separate Hamaguchi the fan and Hamaguchi the director?
Yes, I think, and this is probably a bad side effect of working in this job for so long.
He's directing part 3, yeah. For anybody that doesn't know, Hamaguchi-san co-directed part 1 with Nomura, and then directed the entirety of part 2, and is the director of part 3. And I think they're the same co-director that was helping him out on part 2 is the same co-director that's helping him out on part 3. I don't think that position has changed.
Long, but in some ways I kind of very difficult for me to kind of switch off and watch anything as just a fan nowadays, like whatever, because I've been working as a director and like looking at how to make
Toriyama-san, yeah,
for so long. Whenever I watch anything digital or even other pieces of entertainment, it's very difficult to just appreciate it from a fan perspective. I'm always looking at it in terms of, or can I use this as inspiration for my next project, or how would I work this, what can I get from this, etc. So I think as you said, it's very difficult to have Hamaguchi the fan and to go into that mode anymore.
And you got to be thinking about from the perspective of like Square, much less the accomplishment that he was able to do. Again, Hamaguchi deserves so much goddamn credit because he's been a part of this project since the inception, right? He's also been a part of the project when it went through a lot of turmoil, and had the first part of the game, like Remake Part 1, take so goddamn long to come out. But with a little bit of guidance and a lot of like pre-planning, they were able to execute within about like 3.5 to 4 years, maybe even a little bit less time, the entirety of FF7 Rebirth. Now, a lot of systems are clearly in place, like a lot of systems were already there from the previous game, and animations and whatnot, but it took place in an environment, in a world that you interact with and do not repeat at all, which is Midgar. There's no Midgar almost none in FF7 Remake or in Rebirth, right? So they had to create an entire world map. They had the majority of the world map, a big chunk of it, and make the game flow something entirely different. It's a different game. This is not the same game as Part 1. A true sequel, you know? They did that in a ridiculously small period of time by modern day development standards. And you would assume that there would have been a lot of corners cut where it's like, oh, they're just talking their good shit, effectively, you know, got a game that's going to be just like Part 1, just big hallways, you know, that's all we're going to get. And then it wasn't. And it was like, whoa, like really big, massive environments with a lot of shit to do and a lot of shit to explore. It was like, whoa, this was unexpected. This is kind of what people have been bitching about for the Final Fantasy series for a long time, and effectively was able to make do on that, where it's like, oh yeah, so many of the things that were really cool in FF15 were bogged down by this, and this. So many things that we wanted to be cool in FF12 were bogged down by this, and this, or 13, or whatever, you know? Even FF10, a great thematic game, but still, it was really disappointing when it's just like, oh, a world map, and I just go from point to point, that's it? Oh, man. I want this to be like the PS1 games. Like, what the hell's going on? What I'm trying to say is for the first time in nearly 20 years, like they were able to execute a game concept that lived up to expectations, like truly did, actually met with and lived up to expectations in a way that was like emphatically resounding, where everyone's like, holy crap, this is so nuts. This is so crazy. So what I'm trying to say is that they've effectively built a system that works. Something that works really well that can be used for other Final Fantasy games while not being exactly the same. It's almost like from this point forward, like the Zelda series is likely going to be Breath of the Wild like for a long time. It'll be in different environments and shit, but what Zelda is as a game and not the traditional dungeon crawling sort of linear adventure that it has been in the past is probably changing. I think we could be seeing that happening to Final Fantasy as of right now. I think we could be seeing, not every game is going to be a Ubisoft tower, simulator. Not everything's going to be that, but I think the way that the characters interact with the world, how they interact with the world, how they move from one point to the next, and how they deviate, all that stuff, I think they might have a pretty good foundation here. A reminder, this foundation existed before. It was the PS1 games. FF8, FF7, FF9, all play really similar. Like how you interact with the world, how you interact with the characters, all that kind of stuff. It isn't like these are new concepts. This shit has been around for a long time. I think they have effectively like bones built of what they could use for future titles. And it won't be just FF7 Rebirth and FF7 Part 3, FF7 Returns. But that's the bigger question is like, my dude, how is FF7 Returns going to even work? Is it going to be the same open world thing? Are we going to be experiencing all of the Ubisoft towers all over again? And I don't think I want that, man. I do not think I necessarily want to go out and grab all the Ubi towers again and Fog of War. I don't think they're going to do that. I think it's going to be something different. I think they're going to try to do something different with how you engage with the world, which will make it feel like an actual sequel instead of just like an upgrade over the previous game. But who knows? We don't know. And that's what's kind of fun about it.
Funny story about that and about how my approach to things is so colored by my work now. Again, I love taking inspiration from all kinds of digital entertainment, not just games. I mean, I love going to the cinema and watching films there. I've actually got a young daughter, she's in middle school now, and recently we go to watch films together a lot. And the way we approach the films and our conversations afterwards, I kind of don't really mesh anymore. Again, as a single fan, as just someone going to enjoy a piece of entertainment, they do want to discuss things like, oh, that scene was great, I love that, that was really fun, I really enjoyed that bit. But from my perspective, when I watch it, I always go think, okay, well, I see what he tried to do there, and that scene, the approach the director took and the way he portrayed that, I wouldn't have done it that way. I definitely think you should have done it differently. No, I wouldn't have done it that way. And I always approach it from that creator side. And I think that's why she really doesn't like talking to me about these things much anymore.
In terms of your career,
Funny.
You've seen some pretty significant progression throughout the Remake project. What would you say have been some of the biggest changes in terms of your wider responsibility between what you did on Remake compared to Rebirth?
That's a great question because, yeah, we talked about this for so long where it's like we had this conversation constantly before Rebirth was out where it's like, no, Nomura's not the main director anymore. Like Rebirth's had a different director. Like this dude that was the co-director of Part 1 is now the main director of Part 2.
Yeah, so in some ways, the actual day-to-day work I was doing on the two games didn't change all that much. Right from when I was still co-director on Remake, I was already basically working out the game planning and structure and been in charge of all of that, as well as leading the development team day-to-day. So in terms of my day-to-day role, things didn't change so much. But having said that, I think the biggest difference really with the name change now, it's my name as the full director, is the level of responsibility, and that's the level of dedication and determination I have to show towards it to really. I felt there was definitely a need. Now it is all on me.
Yeah, that's exactly the point. Where it's like, if you're just the co-director, it's not all on you, man. Like, it is on you, don't get me wrong, but is your name now directly associated with either that thing being good or bad? And here's the funny thing. If the first game, for example, you didn't think of Hamaguchi's name in Part 1, you really didn't. You mostly think of Nomura as being the director of Part 1 because his name was all over the place. But at the same time, he was also working on like several other games when that shit was going down, including Kingdom Hearts. So it was like, I was always questioning, like, how much is Hamaguchi actually involved? Like, it seems like this other, because the game did not feel very, like a Nomura game, all things considered. So it was always my question of just like, how much is this relationship split? He's pretty much saying it like his day-to-day job never changed. It's just that now the only difference with Part 2, if this isn't received well critically or by fans positively, it's on him. Like straight up. It's just completely your fault if the stuff does not make it, that you are the visionary. This is now your responsibility. Nomura is a developer that's effectively used to that, right? And used to their vision being the thing, and you're either going to be down with it or you're not, you know? That's a big deal. Like, I'll say the same thing for me personally too. When we were taking on like MVCIB, as soon as my name was in association with others, a lot of people look at it as like this max project, and I'm like, well, fuck, I got to put my everything into it. I got to make sure this shit slaps. You know, there's a responsibility that happens to people that are into this shit, that you want to deliver something that's worth it.
I have to take Rebirth and make it go above what Remake did, and really answer the fans' demands and give them what they want. Live up to the expectations even more, just because it's my name on it now. So I'd say in terms of responsibility, that was what changed.
I get you.
As you're now the leader of the project, and Rebirth has won tons of plaudits, which must be great to see, were there any challenges that the team overcame that you were proud of, but that people might not be aware of?
Yes, I think in terms of the team that I lead, the absolute essential mission that we've been set by the company is to complete the 7 Remake trilogy, to finish it off and make it the best experience it possibly can. That's absolutely priority number 1.
Damn, that's a wonderful thing to hear, considering that Square has been in weird financial situations over the past year or so. And again, it makes sense why they have the full commitment to go full bore on part 3, because they cashed these fucking checks like 10 years ago. And I have to remind people about that. They cashed these Sony exclusivity checks for like a multi-game trilogy, like no shit, a decade ago. The money for this, like how this much would eventually cost and what the commitment it would take over time, those commitments were put into place like no shit a decade ago, dude. Just hearing them say that like, yeah, kind of regardless of what's happening, our goal is just to make sure this shit slaps, to make sure that people's expectations are there for part 3, you know, and to make sure that we're able to execute what this vision was. Like that's the whole point from the very get-go. This isn't some fucking Star Wars trilogy shit where it's just like, we'll just have everyone do this shit willy-nilly. And are you going to carry the story through? I don't fucking know. Like, no. This game is actually a 30-year cook. They have been executing this plan and going with each game in accordance from every single fucking thing. They are still doing so, and they plan to do so going into the future.
But on top of that, maybe going beyond that, I also felt we really need to reapproach how we make AAA games and try something new and create a new direction for Square Enix's high-level development.
God damn. So that's what's exciting, is the fact that, yeah, Hamaguchi, if he doesn't get promoted to like being a big-ass executive out of game making, this guy could effectively be responsible for other franchises after this. Like, I would not be surprised if he is Final Fantasy 17 dude. That would not be surprising.
And in that sense, I think I really am proud of what we managed to achieve on Final Fantasy VII Rebirth in terms of going away from that more traditional, story-driven, more linear gameplay experience, and really creating that exciting, fresh new look at a more free, open world, open exploration style of game. And I think that's definitely something that will pay dividends in future. Certainly looking forward to what my team's going to be making in future. I'm very excited to see where we can take that new concept as well.
Yeah, that was a pretty banger interview, dude. There's some genuinely good questions from FF Union on here. Some stuff that was quite nice to get actual answers on, especially regarding like director roles and development over time, inclusion of elements, like why they eventually went with that stuff, what they're going to be doing in the future. That was a wonderful interview. Is there another recent interview with Katase as well? Curious Corduroy has a video on Katase's interview with Edge. Okay. Thanks for Corduroy for getting this in here, because this is from a recent Edge magazine interview.
Have another interview with the developers of the Final Fantasy VII franchise as they touch on the original game's dev history and how it's helping shape the Remake trilogy, and how moving along with this project has given them a little bit more confidence moving into part 3. So if any of that sounds cool to you, feel free to click the like button, and if you're new here and you'd like to stick around, you can subscribe, and as always, leave your thoughts in the comments.
I'll take the 9-hour interview, please. So
this interview comes to us from Edge magazine number 405. where they got to sit down with Yoshinori Kitase as well as Naoki Hamaguchi to talk all things FF7. Now, I do have to put a disclaimer. There will be spoilers in this video. I've had some complaints in previous videos that I
9-hour video 9 hours ago. What the fuck? 9-hour video
about FF7 OG as well as Remake and Rebirth, so there will be massive spoilers. Just a warning. Second, because this article comes from a paid magazine, unfortunately, I don't think I can include any screenshots of the quotes or the article itself. Some publications are really iffy about that stuff and will not hesitate to send out a copyright claim on your content if that stuff happens. So unfortunately, I won't be able to put any quotes in this video. Massive apology on my part. I know there's a lot of people that when they watch these videos, they love to read along to my narration when we are reading these quotes.
We'll see, the abridged version.
We won't be able to do that this go around. So moving into the article, they start off with the structure of the Remake trilogy and how Kitase recalls that Rebirth picks up with the middle of the original game story, but also still ends in the middle section, and how that made it a little bit tricky to figure out the entire structure of the franchise. And with that, Hamaguchi would then go on to say, when our scriptwriter Kazuhige Nojima submitted his script for Rebirth, I remember thinking that I'd rather do it in a different way. So Nojima's original scenario probably went way past the point of us losing Aerith, but for the structure of all of these games and trying to make things flow better, Hamaguchi would pitch that maybe they should end it when Aerith dies. Kitase would then go on to say, there was definitely a debate. At one point, we thought maybe we could put everything in just 2 games. Then later, we thought it needed to be 4. But once they started continuing with development and they realized how much material they had to work with, that's when they settled on 3.
4 games is too fucking much. I'll just say it right now. I'm an FF7 fan. I'll be down with a 7-part series. 4 games is too much. It would not have been cool if they had to eventually spread this out that long and this shit was spread that thin. Nah, man. 4 would be weird.
Being the magic number. And I also think that that's a really good structure for Rebirth in particular. It is really tricky to pick up halfway through a story and end that specific section still in the middle section of the story, but I think they did a good enough job when it came to the narration and the storytelling and including newer elements like, having Zack kind of supplement some of the chapters, even if it was very brief. I think they still did a good job in ending that second game, with the death of Aerith and having things be really unclear. Is she really dead? Is she alive in a different world? What's going on with Cloud and how he's envisioning this entire act playing out? He's, even more of an unreliable narrator, but it also fits the theme of
way
a trilogy.
More than before.
When you're doing a trilogy, the second part of a trilogy is usually the darkest entry in that project, and it a lot of times can end on a massive cliffhanger or on a real down note for the characters, and naturally losing Aerith just kind of fits that structure of a trilogy. You've lost an important, incredible character. Our party has a win, but they also have a massive loss, so what's going to happen to them in the next story? It really does build intrigue moving into part 3 to see where are these characters going to go next. Now, what's really cool is they have a theme for each part of this trilogy. Hamaguchi would go on to say that the theme of Final Fantasy VII Remake was reunion, which fit perfectly. You look at when Remake was first announced.
Bro, this really old footage, oh my god.
Reunion of us, the fans, getting to see these characters again for who knows how long it had been at that point, 15 plus years at that point. And Hamaguchi would go on to describe it as this combination of nostalgia and discovery that you would experience at a high school reunion by saying, when you meet friends you haven't seen in many years and discover they're still the same people, but with new aspects in their lives. Which is pretty accurate, seeing these characters come back, that familiarity comes back with them. But there's also some new things like, hey, did you do a little something different with your hair? Or you've got a new job, or maybe you meet up with friends who, show up at the reunion and they claim to be the inventors of Post-it notes. Bonus points for anyone who understands that reference. But it can be really fun and exciting, but also kind of nerve-wracking to kind of meet up with people you haven't seen in a while. Now,
Rebirth was inspired by Empire. Do you think part 3 is going to be a mixture of like Return of the Jedi and Return of the King? The only reason Return of the Jedi, Return of the King are the way they are is because part 3 is catharsis, right? The stories in part 3 of anything like Back to the Future, any of these kind of trilogies, right? The whole point of their existence is that they are trying to say goodbye. We need to let characters go. Like, you're gonna have to get to a point where there's a lot of open-ended elements and a lot of story beats that have gone several directions that are left unresolved. So we need to get payoff. And that's what I mean. Like, part 3 has to be cathartic as fuck. I don't think absolutely every question should be answered, but I think that many of these elements and what is happening need to have that level of catharsis and payoff.
Now for me, I was not invited to my high school reunion. And it's not because I'm a bad person. I just flew under the radar in high school. I was so under the radar that when the yearbooks came out, they had sections in the yearbook that awarded different awards to.
You can skip this part, but ADD kicked in and you want to. Oh, Cartwright, you're in here. Okay.
Well, but that familiarity is still there, which is super sick.
Okay.
Now for Rebirth, their defining word for that game was bonds, not James Bond, but BONDS. The bonds.
Yeah. So bonds are literally in gameplay, right? The bonds you make with characters and stuff are actually what bring them together. You doing side quests with them having little happy faces and sad faces above their heads when they're walking around. You have to create bonds with characters that give you experience points, that you level up shit with them, that gives you new moves with them, like yada yada. Yeah, like it was the social linking aspect of this game was clearly a huge priority, especially with all of the dating stuff and all that shit. Because it was a big deal back in 1997 with the OG game. It was.
With the people around you. And Hamaguchi would explain that further by saying, the reason is very simple. The climax of the story is that final emotional shattering moment when we discover what's happened to Aerith. To make that payoff, we needed to build up the bonds between the characters, so you care about them. And they do such a phenomenal job, I think, with bonds in
characterization in this
really
game's stupid.
This
game in part 1.
One of the things I love to stress is that
it's incredible.
Developers don't do things just to do things. And
just as like, you know, narrator note here, it's the thing. I love the combat, I love the gameplay, I love the realization of the world, I love the graphics, right? I get you. The thing I was worried the most about this entire remake trilogy was back in 2015 when this shit was announced. How the fuck are these characters going to act? Are they going to act like people, or are they going to act like weird anime robots like they're from Advent Children, or weird anime robots throughout like a lot of Crisis Core? Zack was the outlier, right? Zack was like the grounded character that acted mostly like a person. Everybody else just was weird. Every other character is just weird, and you don't know why they're doing what they're doing, and you're just like, hey, man, what the hell is going on here? So I personally was super worried about that shit. Yeah, dilly-dally, shilly-shally bullshit. And in my opinion, it's the thing they executed the best. It ended up being, after so many years of these characters existing, what we thought of them in our heads back in the old game to what the developers think they were in like the compilation of FF7 stuff. It was just so different. And it was like, this is acceptable. I feel like Advent Children is acceptable, but not the way I thought those characters would be. And you just accept that that is the way that is. So to me personally, them executing and actually getting the characters the way we remember them being, instead of maybe were they that way? It's hard to tell. You have to go back and play the OG and realize that, like, what did people think of these characters instead of the way they eventually became? That shit is crazy to me, that they were that in touch with how the final characterization would be in the trilogy. I love it, dude.
Rebirth is
it's the best version of every character. Dude, they made Cait Sith tolerable,
where we see them getting closer and bonding and learning about each other, and they take that story aspect and put it into the gameplay, where these characters are now really learning about each other. They're working together. They're doing really cool synergy stuff with the synergy skills and abilities and really working together. And there are so many great moments in this story where you see characters like Tifa and Aerith really bond with one another, which I love because I know that there's a section of the fandom that loves to pit them against each other, which I don't understand, but these are two people who are genuine friends with one another and they confide in each other. You know, at the beginning of Rebirth, Tifa talks to Aerith about how she's unsure of the stuff that Cloud is saying. How could he know the events of Nibelheim when she remembers him not being there? And then later on in the story, we discover Aerith's been confiding in Tifa about Zack, and Tifa asks Aerith, like, hey, when, you know, they get to Gongaga, have you heard anything new about Zack? And they do such a wonderful job with all of these characters growing these bonds, you know, Barrett and Yuffie, starting off as like a fangirl with Yuffie being a big fan of Barrett and Avalanche, and then they start to butt heads, and then by the end of the game, you know, it's like a father-daughter kind of relationship. And again, that's woven throughout everything, not just the story, not just the combat, but those little interactions those characters get in the side quests, it's everywhere, and they do such a fantastic job of that. Now, up next, they talk about more of the structure of these games and how they've been progressing, which is something we've stressed on my channel for quite some time. You start off with 7 Remake, which is super linear. You're confined to Midgar. It's very straightforward. And then once you finally leave Midgar, you get to explore the world a little bit more.
Yo,
you
Mom,
don't get
thanks for the
access to
7.
the entire planet, but you get a pretty good chunk of all these different regions with different NPCs and enemies and side quests to do. And that's pretty much how the original game was structured. And then the third section, it's here's the Highwind, here's a bunch of chocobos, just go crazy and have fun exploring every nook and cranny of this environment. And again, that's what I think Remake Part 3 will be. It will be that open world adventure where we get to go everywhere and do so many things without necessarily being held by the hand. Now, up next,
the neat part about it is I think Part 3, you can't just like dump the Highwind on the player immediately. I think that's like a third of the way through, half of the way through sort of situation. So you still need to experience the value of travel, where it's like, oh yeah, us getting from one point to the next in games is tough, right? And the evolution of most RPGs is literally travel. So you just get the ability to go more places quickly and more efficiently to go do things, right? Initial adventure is sort of locked, like landlocked by so many things. So to me, we're going to get the Highwind at the start. Not the Highwind, the Tiny Bronco at the start. And you're going to get a little taste, like it'll give you a little bit of like being able to travel around on the Tiny Bronco. But then I think that shit's going to break down because it historically breaks down.
They deal with something that was kind of a big topic for this trilogy, and that's how much do they change and how much do they keep the same. And for Katase, someone who was, one of the OG developers, his mindset was, we really probably should change up a lot. And that was brought up recently with how he wanted to change the look of the reactors, and Hamaguchi was like, look, man, if there's one thing that stays the same, we gotta keep that iconic image of the reactors. People just know them way too well. We can't change that up too much. Katase goes on a little bit further to talk about that. He goes on to say, I thought if we just reproduce the original game with no changes, it will feel nostalgic, but not exciting. And fans of the original who know everything that's coming will soon get bored. But eventually he would learn that, maybe if we deviate a little too much, that could turn off a large section of the fans because this franchise belongs to us as much as it does to them. And those are Katase's words, not mine. And the last thing he would want to do is alienate more people. He continues by saying essentially half of Final Fantasy VII, or maybe even more, is now owned by the fans. It belongs to them as well as us. Specifically in terms of their attachment to the characters, I realized we needed to be cautious in not changing those characters by turning them into different kinds of people. Which, for me, I think they did a really good job of that because it kind of goes both ways. Even if we know what's coming and they didn't change anything, it still makes it exciting to experience it with today's technology, with the graphics that we have and the combat stuff we're able to do with this trilogy in particular. So I think it still would have been fresh, but the fact that they did change up not all of the big story points, but how we get to those story points, they deviated just a little bit, makes it really fun and exciting. Like seeing Roche show up. I'm like, who is this maniac? He wasn't in the original game, but he's a really fun new addition to this trilogy.
We called that shit the first playthrough. Roche is here to show us the degradation of soldiers, right? And they didn't exclusively use him for that, but yeah, Roche was like the defining example of like, oh, this is what's going to happen to you, Cloud. You're going to turn into this weird shithead. Like, oh shit.
Trilogy. And it makes you as a player kind of start to second guess, like, hang on, are they going to actually follow the path that we know so well, or are they going to deviate and really make us second guess what's happening? So the story changes are great. As far as the characters, these are still the characters we know and love from the original game, but they now have the opportunity to just flesh them out so much more, and it's so satisfying to learn so much more about these characters and their personality quirks, down to like the little things about what they like to eat. There's a really great side quest in Rebirth when you're in the Corel Beach area, and Tifa's talking about the menu of Seventh Heaven and what she would want to put on it. And her and Cloud get into this really cute discussion about the foods they loved and the foods they didn't like eating, and how they didn't realize as kids they kind of had it really good when it came to the food because they didn't have to worry about it. They had people like their parents making it for them. I love stuff like that. And Katase even brings up the aspect of the Whispers who were introduced in Remake, and how when we first saw the Whispers show up, it's like, oh,
I heard a wonderful theory that the white whispers, especially because it's obviously the black whispers are the ones that are from Sephiroth. The white whispers are the ancients, and I was like, oh shit. Oh shit. Yeah, I definitely am down with that theory that they are effectively the ancients guiding the party, where it's like, ooh, okay.
Okay, hang on. What are these things? Because that is kind of like what signals to players that, hey, some stuff will stay the same, some stuff might be a little bit different. So you could argue that maybe the whispers maybe hit things on the head a little too obviously to signal to players like, okay, this is what's, really going on. But there are some really fun inside fan jokes about how the whispers represent the Final Fantasy VII purists, those people that are like, hey, you cannot change anything, you must not change anything, it must stay the same, which I always got a kick out of. Which leads into the death of Aerith and how they decided to portray it instead in Rebirth, where Katase goes on to say, we wanted it to feel more subtle and to give players the possibility to interpret it in different ways, which they've talked about numerous times before about like the whole goal was to represent the ending in a way that was confusing, to get people talking, kind of to tide them over for part 3, and they freaking nailed it.
Yeah, what was the shit we were saying at the end of part 1? What is the whole, like, the point of part 2? I can't remember what I said, but I think like the big gimmick of part 2 is that you think you can save her, right? That's the whole point, is that in part 2 you'll be under the assumption that she will be savable, but she's not savable, to give you the player and to give Cloud the player, yeah, the false hope that this shit can be salvaged in some way. Yes, and that is pretty much where they ended up going with it.
That section of the game plays out and we're like, hang on, what's going on?
Copium in materia form.
Sephiroth's sword, did he actually fail? And when you really dig into, a lot of the theories out there, it really feels like there are 2 different scenarios from 2 different worlds kind of playing out bit by bit. Or it could, be more of the Genova manipulation kind of stuff we've talked about. It's very intriguing, and it leads to some really great discussions on what the heck is actually going on. Now, up next, we have a fun little Q&A from Hamaguchi in regards to Queen's Blood. And they ask Hamaguchi at what point they decided to add Queen's Blood to Rebirth. He would go on to say, the card games in Final Fantasy VIII and 9 left a strong impression on me. They are what I think of most when it comes to minigames in the series, so I wanted to do something similar in our game. The aim for Queen's Blood was to offer something that the player could customize and play repeatedly throughout the game. He would even go on to talk about how they created a physical mock-up, which we've seen pictures of in past videos, but they also
3D
would
printed
create
thing.
a Windows application to help them keep track and tally the scores. That's how much dedication they had. Like, okay, we need to create some sort of application in Windows that gives us a rough prototype of what this game is going to play out to be. And he wanted to make sure that it actually did have a story that players could follow that I thought they did a really great job on. Queen's Blood as a story really does mirror a lot of elements of the FF7 story, from the Cetra to, someone like Genova, and how these cards kind of work. And
yeah, the Blood Queen is Genova.
Throughout Rebirth,
we get it.
What the heck is going on? What happened to
at
this
some
man
point
who
when they were
created
describing all this
Queen's
stuff, we're like,
Blood
oh,
that,
okay, we
drove
get it.
him mad?
Imagine if Ben says, imagine if Coder are the same soldiers fighting Genova in that crazy lore dump at Temple of the Ancients. Oh yeah, that's what I 100% think, that Knights of the Round, instead of it just being sort of a generic, oh, it's like Arthur's Knights of the Round. No. I think the ultimate summon is effectively this tool the ancients would use to combat Genova. And it was these legendary knights of yore type shit. They will 100% make that shit necessary and part of the story.
And then eventually having that confrontation, which I think was the name of the enemy was the Scarlet Witch. I can't remember her name right now. But having that really cool confrontation where you play against her and she just breaks every rule imaginable. This woman
I got so lucky I beat her on the second try
of Queen's Blood.
She made a bad call.
Card after card that she shouldn't be able to. It's a little frustrating, but once you find out how to beat her and you get that really cool conclusion where Vincent gets involved and he saves Cloud's butt, it's super
Yeah, there's a lot of moments
awesome
in this
stuff.
story that
now they also do give a little bit of a tidbit
metaphorical.
on how, for
Queen's
Rebirth,
Blood
Tetsuya
and
Nomura was the creative
Loveless,
director.
clearly.
And his job was ensuring that the tone and aesthetic of his original work was preserved for contemporary audiences, which again I think they do a really good job of. And the thing with Nomura is that he is a bit of a polarizing figure within the Final Fantasy world, but I think he gets a lot more crap than he should, because he's technically responsible for some of the more iconic, great parts of the original game. For example, after Aerith died, and in the later section of the story, when the characters parachute back into Midgar, all but 3 characters were of this trilogy. Hamaguchi would go on to say, "I am a strong believer in that the idea that too many cooks spoil the broth. If there are too many people inputting, giving ideas and opinions on what needs to be there, what needs to change, the work can easily lose its character."
Right, that's like the whole fucking point of a director, you know? And that's what now has become an issue with a lot of the entertainment industry, much less also the game industry, is that there's just too many talking heads of just, this is influential here, this is big, we got to put this in that, we got to put this in there, where a lot of this studio failure stuff, where it's like, oh, things keep getting more and more expensive and more big, and yeah, some of them hit, and then it's either they hit or you go through astronomical loss. And that's because it's like, no, dude, these things were not created by individuals. They were created by a committee. They were created by just people in power with no creative vision, except for the fact that they think their money deserves creative vision. Like, it fucking sucks. This isn't just unique to the video game industry. This is all over the place, right? Which is why FF7 Rebirth is such a treasure. Square Enix could have been like the battle axe on the back of these guys, trying to pull off what is effectively one of the most difficult things to do by bringing back their literal like golden goose of gaming, and then fuck it up. But they didn't. They let them rock. They let them do their thing. And in fact, some of the lead creative, like Nomura, stepped back and gave more power to the people in charge because he trusted them. So it's like, oh, now there's even less cooks in the kitchen than there were before. That's wonderful. That's actually a very good sign.
He continues by saying, obviously a scenario writer is working in text as per a screenplay. It was our task to consider how those directions would play out in an interactive context. And there were several points where we had to change the script to better communicate the feeling the script writer wanted to evoke via a game. We don't change the core concepts,
Mind Flayer's getting its ass beat.
Which I imagine is a really difficult challenge to kind of overcome, where you have someone who writes a really great scenario that's got some really great ideas, but then you get to the actual dev aspect of it and it's like, okay, how on earth are we going to take the written text and find a way to implement it into a way that works gameplay wise? And I think that by them keeping it to like a smaller group of people that had input on the majority of the project, you know, again, to speak on what Hamaguchi says, it avoids spoiling the broth, because now you've got your trusted cooks in the kitchen making that broth and everyone knows what everyone is doing. The left hand knows what the right hand is doing, essentially. Now, up next comes the thing that I really love, probably like the second most about this trilogy, and a lot of other people love too, is the combat, and how they really did want to try and pay respects to the original game's turn-based combat. To speak more on that, Hamaguchi would continue by saying the materia system and the ATB battle system were core elements of the original, but we couldn't just copy them exactly. That would feel old-fashioned. It wasn't about restricting ourselves to what Final Fantasy VII was, but rather reinterpreting those elements to create something accessible and exciting as a modern game. Now, some people may take issue with that previous statement about it feeling old-fashioned, but he's not wrong. You know, turn-based is an older type of gameplay mechanic, which, you know, it still ages well, but it is still considered old-fashioned. And there are so many franchises that have either moved into action completely or have found ways, like the Remake Trilogy, or even games like Metaphor, to take turn-based and mix it in with the action stuff. And I think that hybrid combat mechanic they came up with for the Remake Trilogy really is, again, the best of both worlds. You're helping evolve the Final Fantasy franchise moving forward with the action stuff, which feels really good. Teruki Endo did such a phenomenal job kind of coming up with the blueprint for that battle system and then finessing it for like 6 months. But staying true to the original by taking...
Craziest part about it is that it makes part 1 feel like a beta. Right? The combat of Rebirth just completely eclipses what the hell they did in part 1. Part 1 feels so basic by comparison now.
Elements of turn-based, like the command-based menu system, the use of ATB, it still has the spirit of the original FF7. And I know there are the purists out there that, you know, don't like the new combat. They just wanted traditional turn-based combat like the original game had. But again, you really got to take into consideration that the devs really do want to do something a little different. So being able to do everything in real time, from attacking to dodging to, you know, parrying, feels super good. And like there's those
Dude, they gave you a just timing parry in this game for everybody. And they gave you materia to make it easier. I couldn't believe that shit. where it's like, wait a minute, so you're truly just going to put it, but is it necessary? No, it's not. Where you have to hit parry timing in the game, you don't need to. You don't have to do that shit. But they effectively gave you like a Sekiro mechanic in this entire game, or a friggin' Lies of P mechanic. No shit. And then when you get really familiar with it, bro, you just fuck this game up. It's so cool. I'm actually kind of looking forward to the later fights to see how much parrying is going to be like essential. But it's crazy to me, like, even when we were first playing these builds, I was like, so you just get a parry? Like, straight up, you can just parry everything if you hit the timing. Huh? Like, this is nuts, dude.
States I get into with this game's combat where, you know, you got an enemy on the ropes and I'm using Cloud, and then I use a focus strike to build up the pressure bar, and then I swap over to Barrett to build up the pressure bar, and then I swap over to Tifa to do maximum damage. It's just so well crafted, and again, it really is the original turn-based combat just being done in real time now. And what's interesting from what I've researched, and there's actually a really great article from Polygon that is super long, and I'd love to make a video on that, but I think that actually might be better suited for like a live stream environment where, you know, like if I sat down and read the article with you guys in real time and actively got your opinions on things, that could be a really cool experience. But I'd have to figure out the whole, you know, live streaming stuff, and like, do I do it on YouTube? Do I do it on Twitch? But that's neither here nor there. But from what I remember researching, initially Katase wanted the game to be a straight up action game, more in line with what we got with Kingdom Hearts. But Nomura was the one who was like, look, we have to stay true to some elements of that original game for the fans. We can't just alter it too much because then it doesn't feel faithful to the original. And you take that into consideration with what Hamaguchi is saying, what they came up with, you know, is great. And again, Nomura gets a lot of crap,
different animations.
But a lot of the great stuff that came out
Those
of
attacks
7
that Cloud
and
was
this
doing was not
trilogy,
the same animations,
is
dude.
from
They literally threw everything out. That's what's nuts. You look at this and it looks like the same game. Like it's like AI art. You look a little close and you're like, wait a minute, this doesn't anything like the actual game. Like the conceptualization is there, but the effectiveness of like the actual execution of it, totally different in part 1. Totally different in part 2. Like when you really look at it, Square Enix really threw all that shit out and then remade it. They made their own version of it.
Nomura. He's got some banger ideas. Not every idea is a home run, but the ones that are hit.
No, I'm not saying it looked bad. I'm saying they didn't use it.
We're going to end on, but the
like most of those animations and attacks and the way that system worked was very different by the time Remake came out.
You have some people that don't want to get invested. Trilogies can also sometimes be, you know, a bit unappealing commercially because it's like, wait, I got to play another game just to understand this game. On top of, you know, sales maybe not being great for Rebirth and this market constantly shifting. None of that has really seemed to affect the developers because it really does feel like a passion project for them. And Katase even had some worries about that, even though they had people like Hamaguchi and, you know, other unnamed devs on this team who
that's what it was, Blitz. Yeah. Oh, the Yuffie DLC
FF7,
was like a test bed.
Go on to be the devs making the Remake trilogy.
And when everyone was super on board with the combat in Yuffie, they're like, oh, we're good.
But he would go on to say, so many of the original game's fans now work in the industry. Remaking such a widely beloved game was risky. Katase then would go on to talk about how the reception, however, to Remake and Rebirth was so great and so warm from the fans that it's been a really gratifying experience for him and the team. And he ends by saying the level of excitement, expectation, and intrigue towards the third part of the series has been solidly built up. So yes, I am reassured, and it's certainly a weight off my shoulders to know we didn't mess it up. And to get Hamaguchi's perspective, he talked—
Really? So that's the perspective of part 3?
Has been solidly built up. So yes, I am reassured, and it's certainly a weight off my shoulders to know we didn't mess it up.
Oh crap. So here's the thing. Katase knows where part 3 is going. You know, he's like the lead producer. So he knows where all this shit is clearly going, and he's talking about part 3. And he's like, we didn't fuck it up. So they're talking their good shit is what they're doing. The last time we heard them talk their good shit, we didn't hear them talk their good shit in part 1 that much, but we started hearing Katase and Hamaguchi and like the leads talk some real good shit about Rebirth before it was out. And it's like, you guys are hyping this up a lot. Like the confidence levels were off the charts with Rebirth, where it's like, I don't know if this is really gonna, even I was saying that. I don't know if this is really going to hit in the same ways that they maybe think it is. Maybe they're just getting us really excited and it's just going to be a larger FF7 Remake Part 1. Oh no, Rebirth was fucking crazy. oh shit. So, you know, in that regard, they're now talking their good shit for part 3, and it's still more than 2 years out, you know?
And to get Hamaguchi's perspective, he talked about being really nervous about the open world aspect of Rebirth, and he wasn't sure how players were going to respond to it. But since it's been mostly positive, he feels
that's very
pretty
good news.
And much more confident. And he ends by saying, now we really feel the responsibility, referencing the work on part 3. So again, obviously whenever you're remaking something that is super beloved, you're gonna have a split audience and you're never gonna satisfy everybody. But the people that do end up liking said project tend to really, really like it, and that's somebody like me. I'm wearing a Final Fantasy VII Rebirth t-shirt right now as I make this video, and I was just so in love with what they did with Remake and how they expanded things in Rebirth. And Rebirth has quickly become one of my top games of all time because, again, it really does kind of offer everything I personally look for.
I can't wait to play it tonight. Fuck,
video
getting
game.
excited.
And I think they do a great job of paying respect to the OG FF7.
Legit can't wait to play it tonight.
The story and the characters and the combat and the music, while also expanding on things to make them feel new and fresh and exciting. And you might turn a corner expecting a familiar character or scenario, but then you're hit in the face with something completely brand new that makes you question, okay, there's something new here going on. What is it gonna be? And
Thanks, Cartwright. Yeah, if that's pretty much it, that's exciting to hear that they talk that good shit about part 3 already. They're effectively like hyping it up just as much as it was part 2, and they actually delivered with part 2. They didn't do that for part 1. I think they didn't know. Even on part 1, they didn't really know if this was gonna slap in that way. You know what I mean?